Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Saturday, May 23rd, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today will be 82.2 degrees and the low will be 58.9 degrees. It is shaping up to be a pleasant day for the region. On the program, we are examining the Trump administration's policy change to end domestic green card applications and what this means for current applicants. We are also covering the situation in Southern California, where thousands of residents are fleeing their homes due to a hazardous chemical emergency. Aside from these major reports, we will also have a look at other headlines making the news around the world. We have a lot to get through today, so please keep listening as we dive into all of these stories right here on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We're starting this morning with a major shift in U.S. immigration policy that could affect hundreds of thousands of families already living in this country. The Trump administration announced yesterday that foreign nationals on temporary visas will now have to leave the United States to apply for a green card. For more, we're joined by our reporter Ethan. Ethan, good morning, and walk us through what actually changed here.
Good morning, Grace. So on May 22nd, just one day before today, the administration rolled out a directive that fundamentally upends about 60 years of immigration practice. Under this new policy, if you're here on a student visa, a work visa, or even a tourist visa, and you want to apply for permanent residency, you can no longer do that from inside the country. Instead, you'd have to go back to your home nation and apply through a U.S. consulate there. PBS NewsHour, NPR, and NBC News all reported on this yesterday, and it effectively ends what's known as adjustment of status as a routine option.
Adjustment of status, that's a term a lot of viewers may not know. Why is ending that such a big deal?
It really is the workhorse of the modern green card system, Grace. For decades, if you were already legally inside the United States, you could file what's called a Form I-485 and adjust your status without ever leaving. It kept families together, it kept workers in their jobs, and it was administratively efficient. According to NPR, somewhere between 600,000 and 1.2 million people currently have pending I-485 applications. And crucially, USCIS did not include any grandfathering clause, which means those folks already in the pipeline are now subject to this new framework too.
Wow. So what's the actual document driving this change?
It's called USCIS Policy Memorandum PM 6020199, and it was issued on May 21st. The title itself is telling, quote, adjustment of status is a matter of discretion and administrative grace, end quote. PBS NewsHour and legal analysts say the memo instructs USCIS officers to stop treating domestic green card applications as a standard entitlement. Instead, they're to treat it as, in the agency's words, extraordinary relief. And it took effect immediately upon release, which is part of why immigration attorneys are scrambling this morning.
And how is the administration justifying this? What's their argument?
USCIS spokesperson Zach Collar told NBC News and PBS NewsHour that the change is meant to return the immigration system to what he called its original intent. The agency's view is that non-immigrants, so students, temporary workers, tourists, come here for a specific short-term purpose, and they shouldn't be able to use that visit as a first step toward a green card. Collar also argued this reduces the burden on the government when applications are denied, because the person is already abroad. And the administration is framing the current domestic process as a loophole that lets people bypass vetting at foreign consulates. NBC News quoted the agency saying the new system will be, quote, fairer and more efficient, end quote.
But critics are pushing back on that framing pretty hard, I imagine.
Very hard, Grace. Doug Rand, who's a former senior advisor at USCIS, told NPR flatly that the goal here is, quote, exclusion, end quote, and that the policy is designed to block the path to citizenship for as many people as possible. And there's actually a strong historical argument against calling this a loophole. The McCarran-Walter Act of 1952 created Section 245 of the Immigration and Nationality Act, specifically to end an older, clunky system where immigrants had to briefly travel to Canada or Mexico just to process paperwork. So Congress designed domestic adjustment as a feature not a loophole.
That's a really important piece of context. Now, what's this catch-22 that immigration lawyers keep warning about?
This is probably the most alarming piece of the whole story. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, if someone has accrued what's called unlawful presence, say they overstayed a visa, and then they leave the country, they automatically trigger a 3-year or 10-year ban from re-entering. So by forcing people to depart for consular processing, the administration is essentially activating those bans. NPR and PBS NewsHour both highlighted this. The aid group World Relief warned this could lead to, quote, indefinite separation of families, end quote, especially for applicants from countries where visa processing is paused.
Are there specific countries where that's already a problem?
Afghanistan is the clearest example. The U.S. Embassy in Afghanistan has been closed since 2021, so Afghan nationals here on temporary status who want a green card would have literally no functioning consulate to process their application abroad. And there are other countries with travel bans or paused visa processing in similar situations. So for those individuals, this isn't just inconvenient, it's a complete dead end. That's why World Relief and others are calling this indefinite separation, rather than just a delay.
Are there any exceptions built into the policy?
There are, but they're vague. The memo allows for exceptions under, quote, extraordinary circumstances, end quote, though PBS NewsHour notes the agency hasn't formally defined what that means. Preliminary guidance from USCIS suggests people who provide a specific economic benefit or whose stay is in the national interest may be allowed to adjust status here. Holders of dual-intent visas like H-1B and L-1 workers, plus refugees and asylees, are in a somewhat stronger position. But the memo explicitly states that even those categories are not guaranteed approval. It all comes down to what they're calling heightened scrutiny by individual USCIS officers.
And legally, what's the foundation the administration is leaning on here?
They're relying on a couple of precedents. There's matter of Blas from 1974, and more recently, the Supreme Court's decision in Patel v. Garland in 2022. Both established that adjustment of status is an act of administrative grace, not an absolute right. So the administration's argument is, we have discretion, and we're exercising it. But critics counter that this memo goes way beyond exercising discretion. They say it effectively rewrites federal statute through an internal policy memo, which is something an agency isn't supposed to do.
So lawsuits are coming. What can we expect on that front?
As of today, May 23rd, no federal court has issued an injunction. But the American Immigration Lawyers Association, known as AILA, and the American Immigration Council, or AIC, have both signaled lawsuits are imminent. The legal challenges are expected to argue that the memo violates the Administrative Procedure Act because it makes substantive changes without going through the formal notice and comment process. They'll also argue it exceeds the agency's statutory authority under the Supreme Court's Loper-Bright framework, which is the post-Chevron standard for evaluating agency power. So this is heading to court, and probably quickly.
How does this fit into the bigger picture of immigration changes we've seen lately?
It's really the latest in a series of restrictions rolled out across 2025 and early 2026. Back in September of 2025, the administration imposed a $100,000 entry fee for new H-1B visa holders. They've revived and expanded the public charge rule. There are proposed rules to end duration of status for international students, which would mean fixed admission periods instead of flexibility tied to their studies. And minimum salary requirements for H-1B workers have gone up between 21 and 33%. So this green card change fits a clear pattern.
What's been the reaction from the business community?
Pretty intense, Grace. ABC News and the New York Times reported that tech leaders like Reid Hoffman and Andrew Ng have condemned the move as an attack on the American economy and talent pool. The concern is that highly skilled workers, the kind of people companies recruit globally, may simply decide the United States isn't worth the risk. If you're a researcher or an engineer and your green card path now requires you to leave the country and potentially trigger a 10-year ban, you might just go to Canada or Europe instead.
And finally, what's the practical advice right now for people who could be affected?
Immigration attorneys are telling clients, especially those on student or tourist visas, do not leave the United States until the legal picture is clearer. Because once you leave, you may not be able to come back, and you may trigger one of those bans we talked about. The policy is in full effect as of this morning, and there's no court order pausing it. So anyone with a pending I-485 or thinking about applying really needs to talk to a qualified immigration attorney before making any moves.
Critical information for so many families this morning, Ethan. Thank you for breaking all of that down for us.
Happy to, Grace.
We're following a major hazmat emergency unfolding right now in Southern California, where tens of thousands of people have been forced from their homes. A chemical tank at an aerospace plant is on the verge of failing, and crews are racing the clock. Our reporter Chloe has been tracking every development. Chloe, good morning. Just how serious is this?
Good morning, Grace. This is about as serious as a hazardous materials incident gets, without an actual explosion having occurred yet. We're talking about somewhere between 40,000 and 44,000 residents who've been evacuated from a roughly 9-square-mile zone centered in Garden Grove. According to NPR, NBC News, and the Associated Press, the trouble started Thursday afternoon at a GKN aerospace facility that makes plexiglass and parts for aircraft like the F-35. And officials are openly saying the tank in question will fail. The only real question is how.
Wow. So walk us through what happened. How did we get here?
It began at about 3:22 p.m. on Thursday, May 21st. So 2 days ago now. The GKN Aerospace Transparency Plant on the 12,100 block of Western Avenue reported a vapor release from multiple industrial storage tanks. Crews managed to neutralize one of the 2 damaged tanks, but the second one went into what's called thermal runaway. That's a chemical reaction that generates its own heat, basically feeding itself, and venting toxic, flammable vapors as it goes.
And what's actually inside that tank that has everyone so worried?
It's a chemical called methyl methacrylate, or MMA. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and local health officials cited by NBC News, MMA is a volatile, colorless liquid used to make resins and acrylic plastics. It's highly toxic, extremely flammable, and very reactive. The tank itself holds 34,000 gallons, though right now it contains somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 gallons of the chemical. And one important detail, the vapors are about 3.45 times heavier than air, so they sink and settle in low-lying areas.
That's chilling. What does exposure actually do to a person?
In the short term, anyone breathing the vapors can experience respiratory distress, coughing, wheezing, nausea, headaches, and burning of the eyes and skin. Long-term, the EPA has suggested MMA may be linked to colon and rectal cancers, though officials stress that connection isn't proven. That's a big part of why authorities are being so aggressive about clearing the area. No injuries or deaths have been reported so far, and they want to keep it that way.
Let's talk about that evacuation zone. How wide does it stretch, and who's affected?
The mandatory evacuation covers about 9 square miles. The boundaries right now are Ball Road to the north, Trask Avenue to the south, Valley View Street to the west, and Dale Street to the east. That footprint cuts across portions of 6 different cities: Garden Grove, Cypress, Stanton, Anaheim, Buena Park, and Westminster. Law enforcement has been using what are called high-low sirens to urge people out, but reports indicate roughly 15% of residents have refused to leave.
15% refusing? That has to be a nightmare for first responders.
It really is. Orange County Fire Authority Division Chief Craig Covey didn't mince words. In a report carried by WTVR-CBS 6, Covey said, quote, "This thing is going to fail, and we don't know when," end quote. He's described the tank as actively in crisis and warned it will either crack and spill or explode outright. So every person who stays inside that zone is essentially gambling on the timing of a failure that experts say is inevitable.
And what about Disneyland? I've seen some confusion about how close the park is.
That's a great question, because early reports from the Associated Press suggested the facility was less than a mile from Disneyland's 2 theme parks. But updated geographical analysis has since clarified the GKN plant is actually about 5.5 to 6 miles west of the Disneyland resort. The prevailing winds are pushing northeast, and again, those vapors are heavy, so they're not traveling far through the air. The parks remain outside both the mandatory evacuation zone and the projected toxic plume.
That's a relief for a lot of families. Now, why can't crews just drain the tank or shut down the reaction?
That's the heart of the technical crisis. The tank has a faulty relief valve that's become, in the words of officials, gummed up or cemented shut. As the MMA started reacting, it began to polymerize, basically harden, inside the valve mechanism. By Friday morning, crews discovered the tank's valves were inoperable, so they can't safely offload the liquid, and they can't pump in what's called a kill agent to neutralize the reaction.
So what options does that leave them?
According to NBC News, fire personnel have been consulting with experts across the country to come up with what they're calling outside-the-box strategies. As of this morning, 3 approaches are on the table. One is remote depressurization, where they try to create a new relief point in the tank while containing the vapors. Another is a mechanical bypass or hot tap, where crews in specialized suits would get close enough to inject neutralizing agents directly into the liquid. And the third is controlled failure, where they'd allow a structural breach to spill the chemical into pre-constructed sandbag containment barriers. That last option is considered safer than letting it explode under pressure.
Where do things stand right now in terms of cooling the tank?
There's been some real progress. As of Saturday morning, the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services has activated the State Operations Center. Crews have been running a water curtain and using the facility's internal sprinkler systems to cool the tank from the outside. The Orange County Fire Authority reports the internal temperature has dropped to about 61 degrees Fahrenheit. The target for stability is 50 degrees, so they're close, but not there yet.
And the worst-case scenario, if it does explode?
The big concern is what's called a BLEVE, which stands for Boiling Liquid Expanding Vapor Explosion. Scientific modeling for a 7,000-gallon MMA explosion is sobering. Structural destruction is predicted within 600 to 800 feet of the tank, serious injury within 1,500 feet, and minor injuries or glass breakage up to about 0.8 of a mile away. Beyond that, the toxic plume could reach dangerous concentrations as far as 2.2 miles downwind. That's why the evacuation zone is so large.
Chloe, is there a history here? Has this facility had problems before?
Yes, and this is where the story gets more troubling. Investigations into GKN Aerospace, specifically the Transparency Systems Division, show the facility has faced at least 10 OSHA violations since 2018. That includes a serious accident back in 2009, where an employee's hand was crushed. Critics and former employees have alleged maintenance backlogs and financial strain led to what they describe as cutting corners on equipment redundancy. Analysts are now calling this an asset integrity failure, meaning proper monitoring of chemical stabilizers like MEHQ and basic valve maintenance should have prevented the runaway reaction entirely.
For the families who have been displaced, where can they go?
There are several active shelters. The Garden Grove Sports and Recreation Center, the Cypress Community Center, and Kennedy High School in La Palma are all open. There's also an overnight shelter at Ocean View High School in Huntington Beach, and that one is pet-friendly, which matters for a lot of evacuees. 15 campuses in the Garden Grove Unified School District are closed, along with others in the Anaheim Union High School District. The Garden Grove Strawberry Festival has also canceled its 5K run and parade.
And I understand there's even an election complication?
There is. The in-person voting center for the June 2nd primary, which had been set up at the Garden Grove Sports and Recreation Center, is currently closed because that building is now an evacuation shelter. Officials are still working through how voters in that area will cast ballots if the situation drags on. Authorities are urging everyone to monitor the Orange County Fire Authority and Garden Grove Police Department social media channels for updates. because this situation remains very fluid.
Chloe, thank you for breaking it all down so clearly. We'll be checking back with you as this develops.
Thanks, Grace. We'll be watching it closely.
Here are some other headlines. President Donald Trump is not just blowing smoke. He stated Thursday that he is ready and would be happy to order military strikes against Cuba. He is looking to be the first leader in 60 years to take over the island, making sure his legacy is cast in stone while 94-year-old former leader Raul Castro faces a murder indictment. The USS Nimitz has been deployed to the Caribbean to make waves as the U.S. prepares for what could be its third military intervention of 2026. Secretary of State Marco Rubio noted that the chance for a diplomatic deal is not high given Havana's intelligence ties to China and Russia. Meanwhile, Cuba is suffering a terminal economic crisis and a total power grid failure due to an energy blockade, leading the government to issue protection guides as they prepare for an imminent invasion. In the east, at least 90 workers were killed in a massive gas explosion at the Liushengyu coal mine in Quinlan County. The blast occurred at 7:29 in the evening on Friday, May 22, 2026. While 247 miners were on duty, many are now hospitalized with toxic gas inhalation. President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang are demanding an all-out effort to find 9 people still missing, hoping to get to the bottom of the deadliest mining disaster in over a decade. Executives from the Shanxi Tongzhou Group are finding themselves in deep water, having been detained for safety hazards that were previously cited by the National Mine Safety Administration in 2024. This region provides nearly 1/3 of the nation's energy, and the disaster will likely spark a nationwide wave of emergency safety inspections for other mines that might be cutting corners. In New York, the 11th Review Conference for the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons has completely melted down. Ambassador Du Hong Viet announced that 191 nations could not find common ground after 4 weeks of negotiations. The U.S. and Iran are at a fission point over nuclear development and recent strikes on facilities, marking the third consecutive failure of the 5-year cycle following stalemates in 2015 and 2022. With the New START treaty having expired in February 2026, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warns that the foundations of disarmament are cracking. Things are getting choppy for the global Sumud flotilla after activists were deported to Turkey following an interception by Israeli forces on May 19. 15 individuals reported being mistreated on a naval vessel they dubbed a torture boat. While Israeli officials say these claims hold no water, Germany, Italy, and Spain confirmed their citizens suffered broken ribs and fractured vertebrae. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir is in the hot seat after a video showed him mocking detainees, sparking a kidnapping investigation. Finally, Republican leaders are kicking the can down the road, delaying a vote to curb presidential war powers in Iran until June. Speaker Mike Johnson and Steve Scalise pulled the plug on the resolution on May 21 to avoid a legislative defeat. Democrats called the move a cowardly maneuver, as the 60-day window for executive authority has run out of steam. This follows a 50-47 vote in the Senate, signaling a rocky road ahead for the president when Congress reconvenes on June 1 as rising gas prices fuel public frustration. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.